Alright, for in this lesson we're going to talk about integers, specifically the difference between positive and negative numbers, and being able to use those in some of the equations that we work with, because we're going to be using them a lot, and when we are substituting numbers in or messing with negative numbers, then we're going to have to be a little comfortable with how they affect a math problem. Alright, so integers include both positive and negative numbers. This is an example of a number line. Zeros typically in the middle, you can see that there. Anything to the right would be positive, anything to the left would be negative. Obviously these are in between numbers, which would be decimals, and they go on for infinity. So, you know, -1, -2, and then 1, 2, 3. Obviously the bigger the negative number, the smaller the actual value of the number is. Alright, so if we are going to be listing integers in order from least to greatest, we need to start from the biggest negative number. And, you know, place values will still hold true in this, so it's just a way of shifting your thinking. So if I look at these, you know, -22 is my smallest number. Then I look at -7, because those are both my negatives. So you list your biggest negative number first, and then you move on to the positives, obviously. 6 and 18. Alright, over here, again, with decimals, there's only one decimal point here, so it's kind of irrelevant with comparing other decimals, but we look at our four numbers, -1.2, -8, 6, and -15. So if I'm going for the smallest number, it's the biggest negative. So -15 would be first, then -8, because that's bigger than 1.2, -1.2, and then our last one would be +6, would be bigger than all of them. Okay, so a couple other vocabulary terms that go with this section. One is opposites. So opposites are exactly what it sounds. It's the number of units that a distance is away from 0 on either end of the number line. So if I have 3 units this way to 3 units to the left would be -3. So basically they're opposites. Whatever, if it's positive, the opposite would be negative. If it's negative, the opposite would be positive. So the opposite of 24 is -24. The opposite of -17 would be +17. Alright, that's a 7. So what is the opposite of? You would just do the other value of that number. Okay, absolute value. So absolute value, instead of like being the opposite, it's a little different. Absolute value is always the number of units away from 0 on the number line. Alright, opposites is the distance from 0, units. So units are going to always be represented as positive, and they are represented with absolute values represented with 2 straight lines as brackets. There are also grouping symbols as well. So in order of operations, you would do those first. So if a number is within these two, this absolute value symbol, it always is going to come out as positive. So the absolute value of 3 equals 3, and the absolute value of -3 equals 3, because it's just 3 units away from that 0 on the number line. Right? So what is the absolute value of 5? It would just be 5. The absolute value of -4 would be +4. The absolute value of -3.7 would be +3.7. The absolute value of 5/7 would be 5/7. The only time it gets a little bit tricky is if there's a negative outside the absolute value symbol. So let's say I have the negative absolute value of -4. Well, the absolute value of -4, and this is where it goes in order of operations, is 4, and then that has to come down, so your answer would be negative. So the absolute value of -4 is 4, but it's the negative. This reads as, what is the negative value of the absolute value of -4? Alright, as we start to do some more problems with expressions, again, we have to treat these as a grouping symbol, and we will do in the next section. There will be more practice with absolute values, but this is just a quick overview on what that means. So in this particular problem, we would have 6 minus a 10, so that would be -4, and then it's still your order of operations. So that's done first. The absolute value of -4 is 4, so this to here is showing that operation, and then we bring down everything else, and then just left to right again. 4 times 4 is 16, write everything else down. 2 times 5 would be our next order of operation, which is 10. 16 plus 10 is 26. So if you're going to show these in order, 9 minus 22, and you can feel free to use a basic calculator if you're showing your steps. So 9 minus 22 is negative 13. We'll get into more detail about adding and subtracting integers. For right now, just use your calculator on those. Plus 2 times 5. The absolute value of negative 13 is just 13, so we show that simplification there. Plus, and I'm going to just do this step right now, 2 times 5 is 10, then 23. We can also use our calculator if we're using our Desmos calculator. It has an absolute value button on this, so we can use this button, the absolute value of 9 minus 22. I went too far on that one. Oops, let's clear that. 9 minus 22. Oh, now I forgot the absolute value. Rough morning. Okay, so the absolute value of 9 minus 22, and then you close out that absolute value right there. So that knows that you're done with that. And it's showing you it's 13, which would have been our second step here. Then we can do plus 2 times 5. You can see that we get 23. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and type this one in. We're going to practice this on our calculator. Go ahead and pause here and try that if you can. So I'm going to say the absolute value of 9 minus 22. Close out the absolute value, and then I'm adding the absolute value of negative 3 minus 8. So negative 3 minus 8. Close that off, and you get positive 24 as your answer.